So you're probably looking at the title of this video right now and wondering, this has got to be clickbait, right? But no, I have a legit theory and think I have found a legitimate contender for Atlantis. Stay tuned. So since seeing Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan years ago, it reignited my love for ancient cultures. I actually wanted to be an anthropologist when I graduated high school. That's what I intended to go to college on. But thankfully, I got pregnant and I didn't put myself in thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in student loans for no salary and a job which I couldn't do because it requires travel or you make 30 grand a year. So Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock's appearance on Joe Rogan kind of got me back into all of that, and I love studying mythology and ancient cultures. And one of these rabbit holes of research actually led me to reading Plato's writing and seeing if using his exact instructions, not these crazy twists and turns that get people somehow to the Sahara, that is not Atlantis. It's not at all the right size. So I wanted to see if Plato was right. What did Plato say? And I just want to see exactly what Plato said. And wow, trust me, it's going to be worth it to stick around. So the book by Plato that references Atlantis are the books Timaeus and Critias. They were supposed to be part of a trilogy, but Plato never finished it. Plato only wrote Timaeus and part of Critias. Timaeus is actually probably the best thing I've ever read outside of the Bible. So I really think you should go read it if you enjoy reading. It's a wonderful read. But anyways, let's get into the Atlantis stuff. In Timaeus, Plato says, one, that Atlantis, the story he tells about Atlantis took place 9,000 years before the time of Solon. This was written in 2500 BC, 2600 BC. So that places the sinking of Atlantis between 11,500 years ago and 11,600 years ago. That timing will be important later. Plato also says to look beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Now, if you can see up here, this little spot right here are the Pillars of Hercules. They are now called the Straits of Gibraltar. And Plato discusses leaving their he said that this isn't a real ocean. This is basically a harbor, the Mediterranean Sea. So he said you have to go past the Pillars of Hercules into the real ocean, and there you will find the big island. So Plato actually uses two different words that were translated into the word island. One of the words actually more accurately translates into continent, and you'll see why later when it talks about how large it is. So this is what a lot of people get confused when they look at Atlantis stuff, because Plato's actually talking about two islands. There is the small island with the city of Atlantis on it that actually leads into the bigger part of the continent of Atlantis. Plato says it's beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and it's an island the size together of Libya and Asia, though what they knew of Libya and Asia at the time was non-Egyptian North Africa, and Asia was just considered all of the Middle East. So that they had access to. So this is a very large land mass. This is not a tiny thing, but the whole land mass isn't the concentric circle thing. Okay, so the concentric circle thing is actually the city of Atlantis. Plato says
that Poseidon fell in love with a young woman who dwelt on a mountain at the very south of Atlantis Island. He said that he made special accommodations for her and made a bunch of zones of land and water and springs of hot and cold water from the center of the island. In the center of the island, which was a mountain. So, and then when he actually gets into describing the distance of the different zones created, he says, now the largest zones into which a passage was cut from the sea was 3 stadia in breadth, and the zone of land which came next of equal breadth. But the next 2 zones, the one with water and the other of land, were 2 stadia, and the one which surrounded the central island was a stadium only. The island of which the palace was situated had a diameter of 5 stadia. All of this, including the zones in the bridge, which was the 6th part of a stadium, and which surrounded the stone wall on every side, placing towers at gates and bridges.
Okay, so that's 3 stadia land, zone, 3 stadia of land, 3 stadia of sea, 2 stadia of land, 2 stadia of sea, 1 stadia of land, 1 stadia of sea, and then the middle of the island is 5 stadia in diameter. So if you put all those things together, that leaves the actual central part of the small island of Atlantis to be about 17 and 1/6 stadia, which is about 2 miles long, maybe a little more or a little less than 2 miles. So that's the actual inner city of Atlantis. But then Plato says,
leaving the palace and passing out across the 3, you came to a wall. This was everywhere distant 50 stadia from the largest zone or harbor, and enclosed the whole, the ends meeting at the mouth of the channel which led to the sea. The entire area was densely crowded with habitations.
So now we have the 2-mile inner island, and we have the 5.7 mile, which is the 50 stadia equals about 5.75 miles. So you have 5.751 miles on one side, then 2 miles, 5.7 miles again. You get the actual island of Atlantis is about 13.5 miles across. Okay, so that's the little island, and now we're going to talk about the big island. Okay, the larger island looks towards the south, where there's a large plain. In the north is covered in mountains, sheltered in mountains. It also says that the Great Plain of Atlantis measures about 3,000 stadia, which is about 345 miles. And it says that the center of the continent across is about 2,000 stadia, which is about 230 miles. The length around the circumference of the plain was about 10,000 stadia, which is about 1,150 miles. Okay, so now into my theory on exactly where Atlantis is. Now that you know all the numbers, now that we've gone over how exactly I got to all these numbers, now I can blow your mind. Are you guys watching? Okay. So, go to Google Maps. Open up Google Maps on your phone, and then zoom in or turn it to satellite and put it on the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You see this? This is called the Azores Plateau. And the Azores Plateau was actually above water. There are still parts of the Azores Plateau that are currently above water. So, but thanks to Google Satellite, you can see at a depth in the ocean that you could not see before. We scientists can actually look through Google Satellite to find geological features and learn things about the planet. And if you take your Google Maps satellite and you go into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and you go past the Pillars of Hercules, past a little island that leads on to a bigger island that can really be called a continent, and then past that is the true ocean, it starts to look like the Azores Plateau is very likely the candidate for Atlantis. And I am not the only one who's thought this. The Azores Plateau have at the bottom what's called the Seamounts, and one of the Seamounts is actually named Atlantis, for they thought that it was Atlantis when they discovered it. However, I think that they were just a little bit off in their directionality. So if you go here and you zoom in, you'll see this little thing right here. This is called the Irving Seamount. And the Irving Seamount is very, very interesting because if you pinch in a little further, you see this tiny little anomaly in the center of the Irving Seamount. Now, this tiny little anomaly, if you measure across, is about 2 miles across. It is my contention that this little thing right here is where Atlantis is. And the Irving Seamount surrounding this little spot is, if you take all the measurements in together and look at the length of cross, is pretty close to our 13.5 miles that Atlantis was when we went through the numbers before. So this little thing does actually fit up well with distancing that we figured out. But what makes this even more likely to me is that if you look above the Irving Seamount, which is kind of one of the entrances into the larger Azores Plateau, just like Atlantis was an entrance to the larger continent, Atlantis was actually an island off the continent that a girl lived that Poseidon fell in love with and had babies with, and so then he carved the island for her, as legend tells it. Anyway, so if you look above, you see the larger Azores Plateau. You see this kind of triquetra shape, and then at the bottom you see this oblong shape here. Now, to me, this looks like an island with mountains in the north, considering some of these areas are still above water. It looks to me like an area with mountains in the north and a great plain in the south, just like Plato's story. And what's more interesting, if you actually measure this little plain area from the center of the island out to where it ends, it actually is very, very, very close to the 345 miles suggested by Plato. Also, there are a bunch of different ways you could cut this island right in the middle, but a lot of them are very close to the 2,000 stadia or 230 miles described by Plato. Also, if you measure around this little plane and try to get as close to the circumference as you can when measuring the outside of a square, you can only do so much for the circumference of an oval. That all adds up to about 985 miles, which is actually pretty close, especially if you consider this city was supposed to have sunk in a day and a night. Okay, you may be thinking you found some landmass in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that kind of fits to the distances that Plato described. But if it was this obvious, people would have noticed before. No. For one, most people think that Atlantis is a complete myth and that all of these old stories, none of them were based on truth at all. They are all just myths and stories people made up to explain the meaning of the word to children, which is ridiculous. We do know that some of these stories are true, that a lot of them are based off real events, and what inspires stories more today. You know, a lot of things have real basis in them, especially the older stories, the ones that have survived millions of years. Think of the best movie, you've ever watched. There's likely a kernel of truth or a decent truth from that story that you've learned that's drawn you back to it over and over. And honestly, all of the experts would call this a fairy tale. So why would they look at it? They would be laughed out of their little, club of experts. So how do you know that any of this part that, I pointed to as Atlantis was ever above water? Well, for one, some of the Azores Plateau is still above water today. Also, the Great Meteor Seamount, which is this one, as a part of these There's Irving. I'll use a little sticker to point to it. There's Irving Seamount. There's the Great Meteor Seamount. The Great Meteor Seamount is one of the most studied seamounts on the planet, and we know it's a guyot. A guyot is a underwater volcano that at some point emerged from the water and the top collapsed because it became an island, and then it sunk back beneath the ocean, whereas a seamount is considered to just be an underwater volcano and not to have reached above the top of the ocean. It still has a peak. However, all of the seamounts in this area, only the Great Meteor Seamount has officially been labeled a guyot. But the Great Irving Seamount also has the surface features that the Great Meteor Seamount does that they use as the justification for saying that the Great Meteor Seamount is a guyot. So I argue the Irving Seamount is also a guyot, as are all of these little things in here. Both the Irving Seamount and the Great Meteor Seamount have shallow and flat summits, suggesting it's a guyot. That it's not just Google Maps I got my information from, but also these scientific studies like this one, where it shows the depth chart of the Irving Seamount, and you see that the Irving Seamount is above 300 meters sea level, which means it was likely above land in the past 20,000 years. You also see that the Irving Seamount has been estimated to be about 8 kilometers across, which is about 10 miles, which again, this is just the summit, this is just the peak. And if the peak is 10 miles, there's likely another 3 or 4 miles, like I showed in my picture before, making up the diameter of that island, or seamount now. So why are those that are less than 300 meters from the surface assumed to have once been above land? So this is where the Younger Dryas thing comes in. During the last ice age, things were going along and getting colder and colder and colder and colder. This accumulated in the Younger Dryas, which was our last little mini ice age. What caused the extreme freezing of the Younger Dryas period is debated. Some people think it's an impact. Some people think it was water circulation interrupted by an ice dam breaking. I don't know, to be honest. Some kind of catastrophic event makes sense to me more for the end of the Younger Dryas than the beginning. As you can see, the beginning, it was kind of staged in cycles, so there could have been several events, or it could have been, the mixing of salinity in the ocean that some people think it was. However, the end of the Younger Dryas, nobody really knows what caused the end of the Younger Dryas. Nobody. There's not even really any good theories out there aside from a comet impact. And a comet impact is suggested because where the Younger Dryas starts, do you see this big spike right here? Where it gets way hotter, really quick. That is 11,600 years ago. And what caused that warming, they think, could have been a comet striking, causing burning and an influx of warm ocean water into the ocean and cold water into the ocean, and earthquakes, and causing catastrophic events. The reason that they think this is because over much of the world there is what's called the Younger Dryas barrier, where you can see a mass extinction event can take place. You can see the dying off of the megafauna all over the world. You can see all these things happening. They've also found nanodiamonds, which suggest some kind of comet or extraterrestrial impact from an asteroid or going through the Taurid meteor stream or whatever. Anyways, all of that is what caused the warming is not important to our discussion right now. All that's important is that you see that the warming happened, because that this warming, even all the mainstream experts agree, caused the last 300 meters of sea level rise over the last few years. And you might be saying, but this has been over hundreds of years. Plato said that Atlantis sunk in a day and night. Well, let me show you something else. How did Plato say Atlantis sank?
After having undergone the very extremity of danger, she defeated and triumphed over the invaders, and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell within the pillars. He's not talking about Atlantis, he's talking about the Athenians. But afterward there occurred violent earthquakes and flood, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way. And this was caused by the subsidence of the island.
Earthquakes and flooding. Now, what would earthquakes do to a little island sitting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right on top of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which at the time had lots of volcanoes and some kind of event triggering earthquakes could also trigger volcanic eruptions, or trigger earthquakes in the land in dormant volcanoes. So like, what if this little thing is just like where the earthquakes split off this part of the island? Also, the earthquake thing would explain the sunk in a day and night. For example, if you know what soil liquefaction is, this is where during an earthquake, for a minute, the soil acts more like water than soil. So it shakes, and the earthquake shakes the ground, and the soil, for a second, the molecules can't stick together, and the soil acts like water, and it just sinks things underground. So if they had giant earthquakes that sunk them into the ground like this, using soil liquefaction and floods knocking all this stuff over, it most certainly could have sank and gone under the ocean in a day and a night, and it would have created an impassable mud shoal in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean for thousands of years, which it did. The Atlantic Ocean was impassable for thousands of years, not because they didn't have big enough boats, but they could not navigate through the middle of the Atlantic Ocean until the islands had subsided far enough under the water that a boat could go over the top of them. So I think I've proven that at some point the Azores could have been above water. This is even including mainstream theory. Everyone thinks that these seamounts were at one point above water. Most recent estimate is 20,000 years ago, but you know they like to give big round numbers, not specific ones, because 20,000 means recently, but not very recently. I don't really know. That's what it means, because science. So now you may be thinking, all right, fine, it fits. It could have one time been above water, but people still live on the islands that are above water in the Azores. If there was any evidence of any like ancient civilization in these areas, we would know about it. You're right. We do know about it.
Cart paths have been found in the mountains, really dug into the ground, looking like they were made by machines, as it would take thousands of years of carts for carts to naturally dig these kinds of cart paths into stone. Cart paths suggest advanced technology and a high population, as cart paths were traditionally used to make transporting goods from one area to another more easy, and this actually took a lot of innovation. And definitely these cart paths are from pre-Christian settling of the Azores. This is pre-Portuguese, and they have no idea what civilization these cart paths belong to. There's also been hypogea found suggesting civilizations there before, and small houses and houses carved into caves that are definitely pre-Christian settlement. And again, they're not sure what civilization. It's not got a name or anything. Then there's my favorite, which is the statue of the horsemen. And in the year 1563, Damon de Go, biographer of the 16th century Portuguese kings, reported that a stone statue of a bareheaded man, clothed in a Moorish cape and seated on a horse, had been found at Carvo. His left arm rested on the horse's mane and his right arm stretched out with an index finger pointing to the west. Ibn Cordalbe said that the outermost end of the world off the Spanish coast there was a warning monument, a bronze horseman who with his outstretched arm indicated that beyond there is no clear way and anyone who ventures further will be swallowed up. The myth of a warning statue found its way from Arab geographers to medieval European cartographers and in 1367 made its clearest appearance on a map created by the Italian Pisagano brothers. At the edge of the map, just about where the Azores actually are, is a figure with an outstretched arm and next to it a medallion with an inscription. The inscription is in part unintelligible, but the message is clear. There's a statue here and navigation beyond it is impossible.
So all of those things have been found in the islands on the Azores as saying we do not know where these came from. All of these things pre-existed Christian settling of the Portuguese settling of these islands. These things are from way before. And cart tracks are actually pretty modern technology. To be there before this was settled by the Christians, by the Portuguese, these would have to be very, very old at a time when most people think that these islands were not settleable. So, there's all the evidence on the island, but you gotta be thinking these are just cart tracks and statues. Okay, this is not some kind of advanced civilization. For one, the way Plato describes the advanced civilization is basically like saying 11,600 years ago people had progressed to the point of the Greeks. There were still chariots and stuff. It wasn't like they were flying around on helicopters. That's not what it meant by advanced civilization. By advanced civilization, it meant civilization at a time when we thought we were all still cavemen. Civilization that would suggest more than cart tracks, right? But you forget that these parts that are still above water, these would have been the absolute boonies. This would have been the top of the mountain, the furthest from the city, the furthest from technology, the least technological parts of their society. The more technological parts of this society would have been lower down in the valleys. And so is there any evidence of any of these places having like actual advanced technology? Cue this story.
The Navy are investigating a large, perfectly square pyramid found near Portugal. Portuguese news reported the discovery of a very large underwater pyramid first discovered by Luciano Silva between the islands of San Miguel and Terceira in the Azores in Portugal. According to claims, the structure is said to be perfectly squared and oriented by the cardinal points. Current estimates obtained using GPS signal technology put the height at 60 meters with a base of 8,000 square meters. The Portuguese Hydrographic Institute of the Navy currently has the job of analyzing the data to determine whether or not the structure is man-made. The pyramid is perfectly shaped and apparently oriented by the cardinal points, Silva told Doria Insular, the local newspaper. The pyramid was found in an area of the mid-Atlantic that has been underwater for about 20,000 years, considering this is around the time of the last ice age, where glaciation was melting from its peak 2,000 years prior. Whatever civilization, human or not, that was around before the ice age could be responsible for building the pyramid. While the Portuguese Navy still hasn't determined the origins, many might question why this hasn't been first reported on sooner than late 2012. Certainly the NOAA, who studies volcanic activity in the area of the pyramid, would have discovered the pyramid through sonar imaging and so forth, since the area is heavily studied due to volcanic activity. Either the NOAA hasn't come across it, or they are hiding what they have found, or the pyramid doesn't exist. The last theory does not seem likely given the authenticity of the find. To further support the idea that this pyramid could have been built by different civilizations, archaeologists from the Portuguese Association of Archaeological Research have recently discovered evidence on Pico Island that suggests their belief that humans existed in the Azores region before the arrival of the Portuguese thousands of years ago. As of today, there is no explanation for who created the rock art on the island. Was the pyramid built by whatever civilization existed prior to the Portuguese, or is it possibly not even man-made? I'm not really considering the not man-made part, but this is very interesting because the pyramid is real.
So they found an underwater pyramid that had to have been built more than 10,000 years ago and is perfectly aligned and bigger than the Egyptian pyramids. Okay. So I'm just saying, the distances fit, the measurements fit, it fits exactly where Plato said it was. It's exactly where Plato said it was. There are mountains to the north and a plain to the south and a little island that serves as your entrance to the larger continent. There is evidence of this land at one time being above water. There is evidence above land of ancient civilizations occupying this area before, and there is evidence underwater that their technology might have been much, much more advanced than we thought. So, what do you guys think? Do you think I found Atlantis? I don't know. I do. But I'd really like to have this looked into. But it won't happen because people don't actually care about what we care about. They just want to argue with each other and try to make something that it's not. Because it's a lot easier to get footage of Africa than under the ocean. But maybe marine archaeology will become the new pet project of some billionaire out there. That would be nice. If I ever become a billionaire, that's where I'm going to spend my money. Marine archaeology. Thanks, y'all, for watching. Thanks for considering my idea. Let me know what you think about my theory of Atlantis.